Good afternoon and welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier. I hope the week's going well. Let me start with some macro thoughts. If we assume a quarterly path for China's GDP of minus 1% quarter on quarter in Q1, then a rebound to plus 2% quarter on quarter in subsequent quarters, that still takes growth in 2020 down to below 4% and the weakest reading since 1990. That's Robin Brooks' IIF. I.e., even a short and rapid recovery still keeps growth in 2020 to below 4%, down from 5.9% previously. And I think it's going to be even lower than that prediction. Performance since the start of the coronavirus outbreak: S&P 500 index minus 7%, hotels and restaurants minus 16%, airlines minus 25%, resorts and cruises minus 29%. Interestingly, Chinese stocks are back to their levels just before the virus outbreak. The CSI 300 now is within 1% of the January high, above which we're back to two-year highs. That's David Inglis. As I wrote on the 24th, fantasy predictions of a V-shaped recovery in China are being dashed as we speak. In fact, I wrote then, China cannot just crank up the factory because that will risk a second round of infections. Nomura, interestingly, confirming what I was saying, new base case scenario for China GDP is 0% growth in quarter one. And the World Health Organization eventually being the word, declaring coronavirus a global pandemic. More worryingly, the economists are starting to think about a second wave of infections in China. And that is why a V-shaped recovery is complete fantasy. A woman in Wuhan said her 36-year-old husband was discharged from one of the square hospital on February 26. On March 2nd, his illness relapsed and he died after being sent to the hospital, William Yang. He was sent to one of the designated hotels to put under quarantine. His illness relapsed and he died after being sent to the hospital. So this is what I'm concerned about, that if you put people in a factory, which is a dense environment, you're just going to get a second round effect. Long maturity US Treasuries have outperformed US stocks by a whopping 21% year to date. J.S. Blockland. Home thoughts: M.L. Marcuson. Been traveling around Kenya, and yesterday he posted a photograph of a leopard in Tsavo West. Albert Camus' novel The Plague, written in 1947, is the #1 bestseller in French literature in the United States. La Peste, published in 1947, tells the story of a plague sweeping the French-Algerian city of Oran. It asks a number of questions relating to the nature of destiny and the human condition. The characters in the book, ranging from doctors to vacationers to fugitives, all help to show the effects the plague has on a populace. But what does it mean, the plague? It's life, that's all. Thus, each of us had to be content to live only for the day, alone under the vast indifference of the sky. A pestilence isn't a thing made to man's measure. Therefore, we tell ourselves that pestilence is a mere bogey of the mind, a bad dream that will pass away. In this respect, our townsfolk were like everybody else, wrapped up in themselves. In other words, they were humanists. They disbelieved in pestilences. A pestilence isn't a thing made to man's measure. Therefore, we tell ourselves that pestilence is a mere bogey of the mind, a bad dream that will pass away. But it doesn't always pass away. And from one bad dream to another, it is men who pass away, and the humanists first of all, because they have taken no precautions. And that took me back to epsilon theory and the Berber, the flu idiocy. As I said, the viral moment has definitively arrived. I was writing on the 1st of March that there's always more to it. This is what history consists of. It is the sum total of the things they aren't telling us. That's Don DeLillo in Libra. Scott Burke, what are the odds that a SARS-like coronavirus with overlapping genetics from HIV mutated and crossed over into humans? Next door to a laboratory which had been enhancing coronavirus with HIV for over a decade, and conversely, what are the odds it leaked out of the laboratory? Confirmed cases of COVID-19 were first found in China, but its origin is not necessarily in China. We are still tracing the origin. That's the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in China. And then I quoted Thomas Pynchon, if they can get you asking the wrong questions, they don't have to worry about the answers. Chinese scientists claim that the COVID-19 virus has probably genetically mutated to two variants, SCOV and LCOV, according to China Daily. They believe that the LCOV is more dangerous, featuring higher transmissibility and inflicting more harm on human respiratory systems. As I said, a paranoid is someone who knows a little of what's going on. And viruses exhibit non-linear and exponential characteristics. Greeting my good friends from the US, the Taiwan way, remember to better prevent the spread of COVID-19, say no to a handshake and yes to this friendly gesture. That's the president of Taiwan. I found some data points, Jody Graphics, this is COVID 2019, daily new cases worldwide, excluding China. That is now non-linear and exponential, surely. Total coronavirus cases outside China, this is from Nucleus Wealth. Cases per million, excluding Hubei, that's Nucleus Wealth again. Number of days to double cases, Nucleus Wealth again. As I said, viruses exhibit non-linear and exponential characteristics, and that's demonstrated by the charts that Nucleus Wealth has provided us with. France, Germany, Spain, and the US all look like the countries to watch. In this clip, Trump denies WHO's coronavirus death rate based on a hunch, calls coronavirus corona flu, suggests it's fine for people with COVID-19 to go to work, and compares coronavirus to the regular flu, indicating he doesn't get the difference. The threat of contracting the coronavirus remains low, according to all our experts, Vice President Mike Pence. And that took me back to the Chinese professor who was critiquing the Chinese Communist Party, but it seems he could have been critiquing Trump and Pence. What is thriving, however, he wrote, is all that ridiculous red culture and the nauseating adulation that the system heaps on itself via shameless pro-party hacks who chirrup hosannas at every turn. Coronavirus outbreak has become a global pandemic, said the German health minister, who hasn't got Dr. Tedros's memo, obviously. And as I said on the 24th of February, what is absolutely clear now is that we're dealing with a virus that has turned exponential and non-linear and is a pandemic. Let's face it, not calling COVID-19 a pandemic at this point is based in political and social concerns, not epidemiological ones, OSH Mitch. And that took me back to Groucho Marx, who you're going to believe, me or your own eyes. The fact that WHO has not yet formally declared makes them needlessly lose credibility in other areas, that's Pelagius. Because the fact that COVID-19 is now a pandemic is an obvious truth that anyone can verify, but we need to trust WHO to tell us about non-obvious truths that we cannot verify. COVID-2019, total number of cases in the top 8 countries with the most cases, excluding China and the cruise ship, as of March 4, that's Jody Graphics. Corona testing stats by country, this is from Coffee Trading, and this is interesting. If you don't test, you don't know. Every day I get DMs from doctors and researchers struggling with don't test, don't tell, epsilon theory. International markets, the Dow Jones, even with a strong move higher yesterday, the price did not break above the 200-day moving average, and it's currently trading off this morning. Let's move on to the currency markets. Euro dollar 111.30, dollar index 97.319, Japanese yen 107.30, Swiss franc 0.9560, the pound 128.83, the Australian dollar 0.6627, India rupee has softened of late, 73.1355, South Korean won 1182.91, the Rial, fresh all-time low, 458.50, Egyptian pound, pretty firm, 1565, and the Rand has strengthened a little bit, 15.2765. This is a 5-day chart of the dollar index from FX Pip Titan, and I think we're trying to base out in the dollar here, unless, of course, the Fed now cuts another 50 basis points, which the likes of Bianco Research think is a certainty. Euro dollar, this is a 1-hour chart. Point of control is down, says FX Pip Titan. I think we're going to see that soften up, particularly because I think the European economy is in deep trouble because of the China EM feedback loop, and because of the wildfire nature of the virus in Italy and the spillover risks. Commodity markets, gold last at 1638.50. I think we're churning around for a while, but we're headed for 2,000 and above there. Crude oil last trading at $47.06. My target is 40. But, you know, we can bounce around a little bit. A bull market in piglets, says Tracy Alloway, and that took me back to October when we were concerned about a pork apocalypse and a very fragile food situation in China. Emerging markets, Lebanon's government is lurching from one extreme solution to another as it wrangles over whether to repay $1.2 billion of debt maturing in 5 days. This is the price of the debt from Paul Wallace. 21st of October, I was talking about the new economy of anger, and you saw that phenomena specifically in Beirut. Paul Virilio pronounced in his book Speed and Politics, the revolutionary contingent attains its ideal form not in the place of production, but in the street, where for a moment it stops being a cog in the technical machine and itself becomes a motor, a machine of attack, in other words, a producer of speed. Sub-Saharan Africa, while there are no precise figures on the number of victims of Burundi's mass killings, analysts put the range in the hundreds of thousands. The Commission estimates that there are about 4,700 mass graves across the country, about the size of Israel. Generose Banyakingagaye gazed at the picture of her late husband on the wall of her Spartan brick house and remembered the last time she saw him, almost 50 years ago. She decided to hang up the picture after Burundi's Truth and Reconciliation Commission started exhuming the bodies of victims of several waves of political and ethnic violence since independence from Belgium in 1962. She thought it could help find her husband by recognizing his clothes, and then she might finally be able to mourn him. My husband was a trader and had recently purchased a car, the 70-year-old said in an interview in Gitega, the capital. One day he left early in the morning to go to Mass. He never came back. Burundi is a coffee producer that counts Starbucks amongst its customers, is covered in verdant rolling hills, and is one of the most densely populated countries in Africa. It lies in the heart of the Great Lakes region where political tension is once again surging. Both Burundi and Uganda have traded accusations with neighboring Rwanda, which suffered a genocide in 1994, of backing insurgents. All three countries participated in conflicts in neighboring DR Congo since the 1990s. While there are no precise figures on the number of victims of Burundi's mass killings, analysts put the range in the hundreds of thousands. The Commission estimates there are about 4,700 mass graves across the country, about the size of Israel. I've written an article which was published in the Africa Report, Debt, Virus and Locusts Create a Perfect Storm for Africa. And I was touching on the fact that there are two issues with respect to the coronavirus. The first is whether the virus will infect the continent. And I said, we know it is exponential, non-linear, and multiplicative, and therefore we should not take comfort from the fact that we've had so few cases, because if, for example, South Korea had tested the same number of people we've tested, they would have come up with no cases at all. Exponential disease propagation, as epsilon theory said, looks like this. Nothing, 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 then cluster, 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 then boom. Bill Gates, this disease, when it comes to Africa, will be more dramatic than in China, and I don't want to play down what is happening in China. So the question about the disease will be answered imminently, but the more concerning point is the coronavirus economic blowback. If you look at the beginning of the year, African Development Bank economic outlook continues to brighten, estimated at 3.4% for 2019, accelerate to 3.9% in 2020. IMF growth expected to strengthen to 3.5%. World Bank 2.9%. Interestingly, the World Bank put out a caveat: a sharper than expected deceleration in major trading partners such as China, the Euro area, or the United States would substantially lower export revenues and investment. That's come to pass. I am convinced China will post negative GDP in the first half of this year. Commodity prices have been crushed. You don't need to be a rocket scientist or an economist to work out which countries are in the line of fire. And then I was talking about the China emerging markets feedback loop phenomenon. Hence, that's turned negative. African countries heavily dependent on China being the main taker are also at the bleeding edge of this phenomenon. I quoted the Standard Bank's chief economist, a 1 percentage point decrease in China's domestic investment growth is associated with an average 0.6 percentage point decrease in Africa's exports. Moody's had downgraded Nigeria in November last year. There's $16 billion of hot money in Nigeria in short-term certificates, which will be looking to hit the eject button. Notwithstanding comments from President Adesina, who said that there's not a debt problem, there clearly is. You can look at the Moody's analysis. Balance sheets are maxed out, debt burdens have increased, and on top of all of this, we have this locust invasion. And I was saying it's time to buckle up, stop popping the quaaludes, because this is, in my view, a perfect storm. Very interesting interview with the CDC leader in Nigeria, Chikwe _I, anticipating coronavirus in West Africa. I think our biggest area of vulnerability, and it's an area no one really quite knows how it will pan out, is if we do have established circulation transmission in Nigeria, what level of clinical care do we need to provide for patients? Because if you do have widespread established transmission, the biggest risk will be in our ability to provide clinical care. That includes ventilators, oxygen therapy to a large number of patients, and that's what I worry about the most. There are specific bottlenecks that we need to work together as a global community to improve. The one obvious one is access to diagnostics. We are 200 million people with one of the highest population densities in the world, living in the middle of the tropics. If I were a virus, there is no better place than the Nigerian context to grow. So as the viruses grow or emerge and compete for space, we have to also have the capabilities to respond. Highly articulate, erudite, and very much confidence-building fellow. A medical staff wears protective gear at a new section specialized in receiving anyone who may have been infected with the coronavirus. This is the Quinquini Hospital in Douala, Cameroon. As I said on the 24th of February, we're past the point of no return in the matter of this virus. Viruses exhibit non-linear and exponential characteristics. I did an interview with Bruce Whitfield on Radio 702 where I said I had extreme concerns about the coronavirus making landfall in Africa. Repeating epsilon theory, nothing, 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 cluster, 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 and then boom. And frankly, as I said on the 27th of January, I have to assume that the coronavirus is already in Africa, but just not diagnosed. That's a racing certainty because, and then this is confirmed. For example, Ethiopia, according to the information I have, EIPHI Ethiopia has so far tested a mere 23 cases. You're not going to find nothing if you've tested just 23. Because on average 1,500 passengers per day arrive from China in Ethiopia, and all they do until recently was scan all passengers from Asia for symptoms, which means taking their temperature. 3rd of February, I was saying Bole is the epicenter of China-Africa connectedness. And now we're seeing a sharp fall off. The air travel demand for Fly Ethiopian has declined by 20% due to the corona. Tewolde told Reuters it's a big shock. And if they've imported many cases, the shock's going to be even greater. Zero Hedge was speculating that super spreaders during an incubation period undetected by temperature readings or showing no symptoms likely invaded Africa from China through Bole. Zambia awards China Railway $825 million deal for line upgrades, signed an $825 million contract with China Railway Construction Core Unit to upgrade tracks in the south of the country. Project will last 8 years, will cover nearly 650 kilometers. If the government is planning on funding the rehabilitation project through borrowing, it could raise questions about the credibility of measures Zambia announced last month to cut foreign debt. Zambia's economy is straining under soaring liabilities. S&P Global Ratings last month cut the nation's credit rating to CCC, 8 levels below investment grade. That's the lowest level for any country it assesses. Finance Minister Ngandu said last month the cabinet agreed to a moratorium on contracting external project loans. So, as I said on the 9th of December, it's time to big up the dosage of Quaaludes. South African All Share is minus 7.28% so far this year. Dollar versus Rand, this is a chart from Senecalytics. My target remains 17, but we could have a little bit of a rebound because of the US rate cut. Egyptian pound 15.63, EGX 30 down 12.74% year to date. Nigerian All Share down 1.59% year to date. Ghana Stock Exchange down 3.61% year to date. Cities in Africa, Mercer has published its list of most expensive cities in Africa, cost of living for expats via Ali Naka. IMF has completed its visit to Kenya, issued an end of mission press release. I'll just read you some pertinent points. There is broad agreement on the main principles of a plan for growth-enhancing fiscal consolidation that would cut waste and boost revenues to enable priority spending while reducing the deficit to below 4% of GDP by full year 2022-2023. Article 4 consultation discussions with the authorities and undertake negotiations on a new precautionary 3-year standby arrangement, standby credit facility. Kenya's economy continues to perform well. Real GDP growth was an estimated 5.6% in 2019, driven by the continued resilience of the service sector. The external current account deficit narrowed further to 4.6% of GDP from 5% in 2018, mainly due to lower imports of capital goods and petroleum products. Lending to the private sector started to gain momentum in 2019, reaching 7.3% year-on-year in January 2020. And I think this visit was correlated to the announcement by the central bank that they were going to purchase US dollars to the tune of $100 million every month between March and June to increase foreign reserves, and that it will purchase a minimum $1 million from banks at prevailing rates in each deal. Nairobi All Share is down 7.06%, and the NSE20 is down 9.48%. Thank you for listening.